combating climate change while protecting socioeconomic interests. So we have a panel of three very capable people to help us have this discussion, which I'll introduce in a moment. My name is John Ingram. I lead the Food System Transformation Research Group in the Environmental Change Institute here in Oxford, and I'm also a senior research fellow at Somerville College. And it's my pleasure to help us through this next hour or so. Just by way of a sort of preface, some of you may have seen the IPCC report that was available a couple of weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago now. 3 areas of particular relevance, I think, for our conversation this afternoon. An emphasis on agricultural droughts, especially in the drier parts of the world. Extreme heat thresholds for agriculture are projected to be exceeded more often. There's a lot of physiological understanding about the yield loss in extreme temperature, various parts of the growth cycle of the plant. And another area we haven't touched on this afternoon as such, although it was captured in some of the images, is that about half a degree of the warming that we currently experience is due to methane. And that's got a big agriculture story, as we all know, through ruminant livestock and through rice, principally. So there are, some very major issues to do with agriculture, as being repeated during the session earlier. Agriculture as a driver is often seen as a problem, but one could also think of it partly as a solution. And we need to think about the title, the role of agriculture in both combating climate change while protecting the socioeconomic interests. And this is the challenge. So what we're going to do is explore the relationship between climate change and agriculture. We're going to think of the most effective ways that agriculture can help in mitigating climate change. Sir Charles has made reference to extreme weather. There is climate change per se, the gradual increase in temperature, but it's the extreme weather that often is the much more challenging issue from agricultural management. And of course, keeping the socioeconomic priorities in mind. So to help us through the afternoon, I'd just like to introduce our 3 panelists. First of all, I'll start with our colleagues coming in over the wire. Dr. Agnes Kalibata. Agnes, very nice to see you. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Early career in IITA, the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, headed in Baden, but also worked in Makerere University. Then again with an IITA in University of Massachusetts link, and then returned to Rwanda as the Minister of Agriculture, Animal Resources, and is currently president of the Alliance for Agra, the Green Revolution in Africa. But most importantly, and most relevant for us this afternoon, I think, is that Dr. Kalibata has been appointed by the UN Secretary General as a special envoy for the summit that's coming up in a very small number of weeks now, and to help the key partners explore the leadership, the guidance, the governance, as Sir Charles was saying, towards the process of the summit, and of course, what follows the summit. The summit is important. What follows the summit, I argue, is even more important. So we need to think about that. We're also coming in over the wires, Barry Martin, member of the managing board of Rabobank. Good afternoon to you, wherever you are. And main area of focus, whole area of expertise, global F&A knowledge, networks and strategy, but also Carbon Bank, which is an interesting new development. We'll perhaps be talking a little bit about that. As I understand, Barry, you started your career in Brazil, but has now, over many years, various positions around the world with Rabobank, and as I say now, a member of the managing board. And finally, here in person, David Buckeridge. I hope Agnes and Barry, you can see us and you can hear us okay. Very good. I like the thumbs up. That's always good. So David served as director and chairman of a range of companies. Sitting at lunch, I just, wow. Agribusiness, pharma, public health industries, a wide range of issues. CEO of Adventa until recently, which is the largest independent agronomic seed business in the world. So between the three of you, I think we're going to have tremendous expertise to discuss some questions. I've laid out the sort of general idea of what we're trying to do, and what I'd like to do is just kick the conversation off by asking you each a question, and then ask the others to respond. So it is a conversation amongst the panel rather than a sort of bilateral chat with me, and we hopefully will get a good interaction going. So what I'd like to do, if I may, is just start with you, David. Over lunch, we were talking about the contribution of regenerative agriculture. But think back to the Green Revolution, what a tremendous success that was in alleviating hunger. We're all aware of some of the environmental consequences of that. So now I know you've got a particular interest in regenerative agriculture. How can we, or how can you see that as one of the major tools in the toolbox to mitigate risk of extreme weather, while obviously making the positive contribution to the environment, the better soil health and the biodiversity and all sorts of things that we hold dear? But what's its role in reducing the risk of impact of extreme weather?
John, thank you very much, and very nice to see you all. I think regenerative agriculture is a term which is being extremely widely used at the moment, and it currently lacks a hardcore definition. There are many people practicing regenerative agriculture, and in a sense, maybe that doesn't totally matter, because some of the actions we need to take are urgent. Agricultural systems respond very slowly to change. And so the point that Sir Charles made about acting now is very important, because this just takes some time to work through agricultural systems. How does regenerative agriculture help extreme weather conditions? I think there are no avoidances for an individual farmer of a sudden and extreme weather event. There are going to be years where farming is extremely difficult. And the only option for larger farmers is land diversification around that, which means spreading your areas out so that hopefully the extreme weather doesn't hit all of your farm. I think that's very difficult in a smallholder farming situation. You have your plot of land, that's where you are, and that's what you will have to suffer if an extreme weather event comes along. But one of the key principles of regenerative agriculture, and I would say about it, it can be practiced on a micro level with subsistence farming and on a big level with corporate farming. It's adaptable to both farm sizes. One of the diversifications it can very well cater for is rotation in time, in other words, crop rotation. And one of the things that's happened with what we all now seem to call conventional agriculture, whatever that is that the brilliant inventions that we made in the Green Revolution to help drive up productivity, in some ways, they helped us also to artificially modify the ecosystems that we're farming in. They allowed us to cut some corners by interventions with fertilizers, with crop protection chemicals, and therefore we relied less on natural solutions for those kinds of problems. And one of the things we've done in many cases in agriculture is we rotate our land less. We grow the same crop over and over again. And one of the principles of regen is to go back to better, wider rotations, 5 or 6 different crops in a rotation. And I think that's one critical thing. By doing that, we also have a significant impact on the health of the soils, which is something else which has declined for us over time. I'll stop there and maybe get
Agnes, would you care to comment on what David said, or your view from the world of African agriculture?
No, thank you, David, for those comments. When I was growing up, one of the things I knew was that basically you don't farm if you don't rotate. So it's one of the oldest practices that we definitely have left on the side. And of course, there are reasons why that is the case: decreasing land size and the fact that people have to then use land over and over, increasing population, of course. But there's also another opportunity in the regenerative agriculture that I see that maybe David didn't bring out. And again, some of the things we need to tweak several times to see the best way to get the most out of them. I would look at diversification of production systems within that. And in this case, I'm talking about diversification of, I mean, going to some of the more traditional crop varieties that provide ability to survive in less farmed and less manicured environments, agricultural environments. So there's an opportunity to combine some of those drought-resistant varieties that would perform better under these regenerative and rotational systems that we can explore more. There's opportunity to use improved genetic potential that is available, even conventionally available in some of these places, and make regenerative agriculture even more productive. So there's huge potential of combining rotation, following, and genetic potential into ensuring that agricultural systems can feed the world or can feed people or communities, while at the same time minimizing impact on the landscape in which they are being done.
And to what degree is that going to help in protecting the socioeconomic interests, either of the grower or of other actors in the value chain?
If you're asking me, the major interest you're looking for actors in the value chain, primarily the farmer, you want the farmer to get good yields. That's why I brought in the genetic gain. You whatever you do, you want to make sure the farmer gets good yields. If we can protect that, then we are protecting the social economic impact to the farmer, and at the same time taking care of the benefits and the best that regenerative agriculture has to offer. So that's how I would look at it.
Mm-hmm. Perry, would you care to comment?
Oh yes, I think the point David is making are extremely important. You're talking about resilience, right? So how you can improve productivity and increase resilience. But if you go specifically then to the climate impact, today agriculture is emitting something like 12 gigatons of equivalent emissions to produce what we produce today. But if you look at that, of that 12 gigatons, 6 gigatons actually are related to deforestation and the way we use land, right? So one of the derivatives of the big benefits of regenerative agriculture, besides increase of productivity by using less inputs, is that it allows you to increase the biological mass into the ground. And I think that's one where suddenly you get food production actually becoming, and as you said in your introduction, John, becoming one of the solutions for the future, where you use this augmented, let's say, biomass that comes with regenerative agriculture, which is a kind of a derivative coming with that, so to reduce the total emissions of the food production. So I will leave it here. You already in your introduction, you talked a little bit about the carbon bank, but we come back to that later.
We'll come back to that in a moment. Yeah, I'm just interested again in the, Agnes, you were talking about including fallowing. Of course, that is, that's taking some land out of that season's production purposefully. So you've got to see that in the round for the whole agribusiness, and is, one has to have a net benefit of taking that land out of production for a season or two, or however long it is. Is that something that you're advocating? I'll come to David and Agnes.
Oh, sorry. It doesn't need to be only by fallowing land. You can also have regenerative and increase the biomass by where you are planting your corn, and even where you are rotating the normal crops.
Yeah.
So I'm not really talking about fouling. I'm really talking about increasing the biomass in the land that you are farming today. It's really, if you do a no-till crop, or if you rotate crop with also with livestock, as some of the experiences we are seeing in Brazil today, which have been extremely successful. What we can see is that you can increase the biomass of pretty much 1 ton per acre per year by just changing the way you do your farming practices. And that's what also is part of regenerative farming. Thank you.
David, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, really to pick up on something Agnes said, which I think was absolutely correct. And really the biggest message I think about regenerative agriculture is we've actually got to learn to invest in soils as well as investing in the crops that we're growing on those soils. And sometimes that means putting value back into the soil. One of the most important principles of regen is to leave the soil covered for 100% of the time. And what does that do? We're investing in a crop between crops, which we can then use to provide organic matter down into the soil. And you know, with your background, you'll know all about getting organic matter to be created in soil and the difficulties of carbon nitrogen ratios of doing that. But without going into all that detail, there is real need for us to improve the crops we use between the cash crops. You know, plant breeding has focused principally on 7 crops globally for the whole of the Green Revolution. And there are, I'll throw one at you. If we invested money in legumes as a category of crops, and I don't just mean soybeans, I mean cowpeas in Africa, I mean pigeon peas in the Caribbean, I mean grass pea in India, we could substantially improve those genetics for the purpose of regenerative agriculture, and we would have a more holistic system for the whole rotation. But and all of the genetics we need to understand is there because we've invested in things like soybeans in massive amounts over 50 years. The relatedness of those species is huge. Yeah. So there's just one thing there. I would say, if I was going to put money into something, I would spend some money on breeding legumes at a level of intensity that we've seen people breed corn and rice and wheat.
I guess talking about, can you hear me?
Yes, Agnes, go ahead, please.
No, I guess talking about plant needs, one of the things that regenerative agriculture could be extremely good at, if we explored it a little bit more, is also returning nutrients to the soil, right? We are talking about carbon and all that, but really one of the biggest challenges we see on the African continent is just how mined the soils are. And the plants that what we eat and what we throw, if you look at what we throw because you don't need it, it's probably 60% of what we harvest. So if that stuff is returned to the soil, you're already returning a significant amount of all those micro elements that have gone into building that plant up. And we just, you know, sometimes burn it or throw it away into other places and miss the opportunity to return to the soil. So for me, I find this also as a very critical element of regenerative agriculture.
Yeah. But stover is often used for multiple other reasons, isn't it? You know, it's wonderful to think of it as a resource, but it's a resource for, as you were saying, heating. You know, I've seen people cooking with maize stover. There's all sorts of other demands on it as part of the overall agricultural product. So one just needs to think of, you know, the alternative uses for these what are often called byproducts or straws, and actually think of them as a resource which could be better used than as heating.
They would reduce fertilizer needs. I mean, if we did this, maybe, like you said, David, it takes forever to rebuild agricultural systems, but the opportunity to get back to better fertilization of the soil without introducing inorganic fertilizers has to be that we are returning what we've taken from the soil.
So our title is Combating Climate Change, which includes both adapting to and mitigation of. So the adapting to, the regen systems that we've been discussing are valuable to spread risk, to mitigate risk. I think that's what I've been hearing, but also the opportunity to sequester carbon, particularly in the soil, given the sufficient nitrogen and all the rest of it that we understand. And so really, is that regen system going to actually produce enough yield per hectare, and I'm going to say tons per hectare to be specific, of foodstuff compared to a more conventional system? Is there enough evidence of how you do regen so that it doesn't actually end up with a reduced global harvest.
Well, I can relate very briefly direct experience on that. In 2013, a company that I work very closely with started regenerative agriculture in Central Europe, in Poland and in the Czech Republic. It didn't do it because of climate change. It did it because it wasn't happy with its performance of its farms. And when it looked at the soils, which it had inherited from state farming practices in the Eastern Bloc of Europe, they were very denuded, they were very damaged, they were structurally damaged, and they were nutritionally damaged. And so it sent some of its young Polish graduates from the University of Poznan to the United States, and they met people like Gabe Brown, who's one of the fathers of regenerative agriculture, Gary Zimmer, and they learned what people were doing in the US, and they came back to Poland in 2013 and started a regen program. So we're now 8 years into that program. In that program, the productivity of the fields in that program, and this is over 50,000 acres, so this isn't a small farm, the productivity is at or above where we were with conventional systems. And in that period of time, we have a double-digit increase in soil carbon and soil organic matter in percentage terms. So 8 years is quite a long time. We said act now. I think there's evidence that we will see bumps in that road. Not every year will be up, but the trend line of what we've managed to do with soil carbon is extremely positive, and we use less inputs per unit of output on those farms today than we used in 2013. So I think the system works, but you have to start. You have to measure a lot of other key performance indicators, not just yield. And there is a transition. It isn't always up and to the right. The first few years of changing the system, soils respond slowly, but it does work in that system.
You have to think long term. That may be part of the reluctance. Why doesn't everybody do it if it's so good?
John, yes. So, what David said, we have been supporting some of our clients globally. That we, as you know, we finance millions of farmers around the world, and we have some experience going on in Brazil and the US and Australia right now. Some of them already running for over 5 years. And the first conclusions, and they're very preliminary conclusions, is that it takes 5 years for you to start seeing the benefits. But the benefits that we are seeing right now is improved cash flows of around 20% regarding improved cash flows. I'm not saying that more productivity. We have not seen more productivity, but as you said, David, the inputs go down. So the increased cash flow for the farmers around 20% after 5 years, but you need to invest. And I think I call this valley of transformation. That's the real key where we will have to talk about how are we going to finance this valley of transformation. That's one of the ideas of maybe if we put a price on carbon, we could help those farmers to do and get over this valley of transformation. Yeah.
Well, that's a really interesting point, because it leads me to my next question, which I was actually going to put to you, Barry, in the first instance. What's the contribution of what you might call the non-technical aspects to help address the climate change agenda? I'm talking about microfinance, microinsurance, better Met services, that sort of aspect. Where do you see that as a major benefit or lever for change?
Well, I have a view here is that one of the big issues that we have is that most of the farmers, they're producing and then they're trying to sell the products. So the first lever of change would be that we as a society improve the value chain, so that when we're going to produce, we actually produce what the consumer is going to buy and not what we think they're going to buy. One of the worst things, and now I'm talking about smallholder farmers, and Agnes knows that, when you drive around some of the towns in Africa, is that you have all these tomatoes piled up on the next to the road, and obviously they will not be sold, maybe only some of them. So it's a huge waste. Instead, that would be the value chain. So the first thing is that we need to make sure that this value chain works properly. And I think, and as Agra is working on it, and Rabobank and MasterCard, we need to have a good digital system. And that can be done through a digitalization, to very simple, that we link the commerce, the consumer to the producer one way, so that doesn't happen. So I think if we don't have that in place, we will continue into this rat race of the smallholder farmer trying to guess what he should be producing, and then being always in the hands of the middleman. And then once you have that established, means that you have a better value chain. Obviously, the risk of financing that value chain goes tremendously down, because you know that the weakest link is covered, right? So then the next step is that once you have that, and you have that in the digital way, you can finance the digital way, and then you can add all the things you talked about. You can add finance, you can add insurance for resilience, etc. But the thing is the access and information. So in my view, digitalization for the smallholder farmers is going to be extremely important for us to handle this.
Agnes, can I come to you now? I was actually going to ask you a question very related to what Barry's been talking about, which is how can the access to the urban markets be improved? How can the value chain be made more equitable, fairer, more effective, so we don't have piles of rotting tomatoes beside the road in the countryside, but we have a system to either have primary processing on farm, so takes the glut of the heat of that season and turns it into a product which is more shelf stable and transportable. How do you see the opportunities for balancing up the value chain to the city?
No, thank you. Maybe just a moment to comment on what Barry was saying. I mean, we just did a whole lot of evaluation of our work, and we find out that all the technical, and you said technical versus non-technical, all the technical input we are putting into the systems you're working in are great, but they always come short when it comes to ability for people to access funding and be able to translate the knowledge they're acquiring and the technologies they're acquiring into businesses. The business environment remains weak. So one of the things we've tried to do in my institution is to try to create the visibility that Barry is talking about. And the visibility comes in form of digitization and ensuring that people have access to tools, but also they are visible. The other thing we've done is to create platforms where businesses can come together from different perspectives of businesses, but really have an opportunity to engage and understand where is the market. I mean, where is the source and where is the production system and where is the market. So these platforms only become successful, and this is to take to the point that you were making. The most successful we've seen of these platforms is where markets work, right? If there's an offtake, either associated with a processor or associated with someone who is going to sell the stuff somewhere, then everything else is pulled along. The technologies are taken, extension works, everything, farmers have reason to invest in post-harvest management, everything starts working. Now, in terms of ensuring that these markets work, there are a number of things that have to be done to ensure that markets work. Investing right now, at least from the perspective of the African continent, we have not significantly invested in adding value to commodities so that there's a good pull factor coming from. But also the cost of production in many of these places remains high because the whole system is expensive. It's really expensive to access funding in the whole system, which ends up making the whole system expensive and uncompetitive versus imports. So the market, addressing the market challenges in some of these places is going to have to be around de-risking businesses, but also ensuring that some of the things that have nothing to do with finance that are very critical to driving businesses, like infrastructure, like access to energy, like, you know, the things that make it so difficult for these markets to develop in processing and adding value, the thing that make it very difficult for them to develop, or even in accessing city markets and other rural and other urban markets. Unless those things are developed, connectivity to markets still remains weak, and the viability of agricultural systems, smallholder agricultural systems, remain shaky. It's not that these farmers can't produce, or it's not that they don't understand the value of technologies, but they see no value in producing more than they need if they can't sell it. So we are going to have, I think, if Africa did, for example, again, talking about Africa here, if Africa did two things differently, investing in connectivity to markets in terms of real infrastructure connectivity to markets, but also investing in the cost of doing business in the sector, I think are two things that are very critical to ensuring that the sector moves forward. Yeah, and that would bring the equilibrium that you're looking for.
So, in the context of the panel discussion on how to combat climate change and the challenges that climate change is bringing, to what degree can we say improve market infrastructure and improve physical infrastructure to support improved market infrastructure will help to mitigate risk of extreme weather? Is this because we have a bigger diversity through the regen philosophy and therefore different market streams? How can we see an enhanced market help to mitigate risk of extreme weather?
I mean, once people have access to better markets, they definitely have a reason to invest in their land. Today, farmers, especially out in my part of the world, farmers have if they don't have access to markets, they have no reason to want to invest in yield increasing technologies that take up less land. They would rather do more land, right? So 30% of production still comes from new land. New land means that you're cutting forests. New land means that you're using less inputs, means that you're degrading land faster. So degradation of land and use of new land always to come up with means of production is one of the things that is degrading ecosystems very fast, especially on the African continent. And if there was one thing I would say Africa is contributing to climate change, would be the degradation, the rate at which we are degrading ecosystems from an agricultural perspective. So there's an opportunity for farmers that have access to markets to invest in better production systems, to invest in protecting their land, because they actually care about protecting the land. It's just that the business viability of doing that is not there when they don't have access to markets.
Barry, come back to you in a moment. Barry, could you it's almost a challenge, I think. We don't have the business environment in place.
Yeah, but that's because we most probably always go from the other side. So my view is, and that's why I started saying it's the access to market that starts the whole thing. And the question that we need to do when we made the system transformation is really, we know where the food is going to, right? So the cities are growing and we know exactly the cities. And we have not been looking at as a society of starting, okay, let's sell the product. And where do we who takes the risk of not selling? Actually, that full risk is at the farmer side. It's not at the end side of who's using that product. So in my view, that's where the biggest contribution that we could have for climate change is to make sure that we invest in organizing the markets where those products are going to, and then from there go backwards and get to the farm. And so it made me very simple. I mean, this system is almost obvious in the US, or even if you look at Brazil. Why has Brazil been so successful, and why has soybean been so successful? Because we know the Chinese are going to buy. So I say we know because I'm Brazilian, right? And I also have a farm in Brazil, so I produce also. So it doesn't matter. I know who is going to buy, right? So I already have a buyer. I don't need to worry. There's always going to be a price taker and willing price taker, regardless if and that's where the big difference is. If there would not have been China, Brazil will not have been so successful in the production of soybeans. It's a very simple equation. And that's what we need to create. We need to create successful markets in all those big metropolises, so to supply. And then you de-risk it, because at the end, the risk is, where is the cash flow going to? If all the risk is going to go of a non-working market to the small farmer, you always get to the weakest link, right? So, and that's what my point is here, which I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, just to, I think Barry's on exactly the right track here. If you turn this upside down, and whether you're a smallholder farmer or you're a very large corporate farmer, farmers have spent too much time being sort of asset driven and producing what they think their land will produce best, rather than thinking about what the market demands. And if you go to the consumer and you install the kinds of needs that Sir Charles was referring to in terms of what they want to eat that's good for them to eat and the way they want to see their food produced, you've got to drive that back down the value chain to the people that do the production. If a farmer is given an incentive to produce something in a more environmentally sustainable way, he's going to do it. The question is getting that communication back. And the good news is, if we were having this conversation 25 years ago, we would not have the digital tools at our disposal to shorten communication lines in the agricultural supply chain. These supply chains are very long and they're very global. And we have technology now, which we can do that for a few cents. It's not expensive. And we need to apply that into a system. And in large corporate farming, one of the reasons why the food companies talk to large corporate farms is because they can give scale. The food industry is enormous. So somebody who grows 10,000 acres is absolutely minuscule. They need millions of acres being pushed down these food supply chains, these big companies. So that's got to be much more of a systems that aggregate the very disaggregated sustainable agricultural systems we'd see in places like Africa and India. It's communities that come together to produce something of a standard that goes through a supply chain. And it's challenging, but we can do it much better today.
Cooperatives in this sort of approach?
I think if that's what that takes, or we've done things in Central Europe where we've had a hub farm doing things in a certain way, and then we've created what we call lighthouse farms around that, because it doesn't happen without farmers learning the systems. And most farmers grew up in the last 30, 40 years of production agriculture. They know how to use nitrogen fertilizer and crop protection. They don't know how to do regen. And they need that extension and assistance that all went in the Green Revolution to teach people to be production agriculturalists. But we have to put that back in now. Otherwise, we won't get there.
You're arguing that there's an importance of scale.
Yes.
And so, Agnes, in many of the African agricultural systems that I've seen, scale isn't the word. They're small, they're disconnected, disaggregated, I should say.
Can I just add one thing? And sorry, don't want to hog this, but it's amazing to me that I work on the board of a farm which is 200,000 acres. I spend all my time trying to measure things per square meter, and yet we're talking here about little farmers that are these farmers know their square meters much better than I know my 200,000 acres. We just need the communication and the digital tools to connect the two things up.
Do you see that digital revolution, Agnes, as a way forward?
No, I absolutely. You see, take an example of a country like Rwanda, right? You're talking about small land sizes, ability to produce on small land sizes. It doesn't get any smaller. So like you said, what I learned from the system in Rwanda is just how anxious farmers are to protect their land. These farmers understand more than anybody, I think, in the world, the value of a square meter of land. So it's not that they don't want to do it. What digitization does for them, for smallholder farmers and communities in smallholder farming, is really enhance the platform idea we've been talking about. In Rwanda, we introduced a mechanism where we talk about consolidation. And consolidation is important for many reasons. Consolidation is about scale. How do you help farmers achieve scale on small pieces of land? Part of it came through agreeing with them that, listen, you do your land, everybody does their land, because we have a freehold land title in Rwanda, everybody owns their land. But at the end of the day, you standardize the process so that you can be responsive to the market. So what really worked for us is the ability to be able to bring in that standardization. So digital technology here allows faster learning, allows the ability to reach hundreds of farmers at the same time, allows access to markets, and really creates an ecosystem that allows, removes information asymmetry, which is the biggest challenge you have with smallholding environments. So I think the opportunities here in terms of as well taking advantage. I mean, we didn't really want COVID, but it's here. And one of the things we've learned from COVID is that digitization has moved so much faster, not just in terms of moving information asymmetry, but also in paying for services, right? In engaging around the services. So now it's very common for people to not want to touch money, even in communities where that was a usual thing. So the opportunity that is right in our midst right now to take advantage of the digitization and take it to the next level in services, in financial services, in extension services, in creating platforms of markets for communities is now, and we should take advantage of it. But also in creating information around climate change and how individually we're impacting climate change.
I was just going to say, everything you've said is absolutely true, even if we weren't talking about climate change. Just the general agricultural development, agenda. What makes it specifically important? And let's just think about some of the mitigation and the opportunity to think about carbon markets. And I'm looking at you, Berry, here. Where can we actually incentivize soil carbon sequestration or biomass sequestration generally? What's going on in your world, Berry, on that?
Well, thank you. Look, it's actually a very simple concept, right? So the concept that we are looking at is two, right? So if you look at carbon, you have you could sequester carbon using regenerative farming. It's around, as I said, 1 ton per acre a year that you can capture between 1 and 2 tons. So if today a ton in the open market is going for $30–40 a ton, you can make a calculation how much you can get for it. So, and that what you're looking at, that's what could finance your what I call the value of transformation, right? So you need to go through this value of transformation, and you need to get cash flow for that. So what we are doing as Rabobank right now is because we are very interested in that. We think that it's something that needs to be developed. But the nature-based carbon credits, they have no framework, they have no standardization, they have no liquidity. There's a lot of questions about how solid they are, how do you do accreditation? So what we are doing right now is investing millions of trying to get that going for our clients, because we finance something like almost 100 billion euros of farmers around the world. So imagine if they could assess this pool of opportunity that's coming up, it would be fantastic. So the idea here is to create a framework so that we can have a product, can have a carbon that's reliable, tradable, and that corporates in pension funds, consumers, even other companies that have committed to net zero by 2050 can take them and buy them and put them on the balance sheets on a reliable way. And more of that, more and more, and that standard is not there. I know there are task force working on it, but you also need to create liquidity. You need to make it collateralized. I need, as a bank, if I want to finance that, I need to get collateral. I would like to get collateral of that carbon, so that I can finance on that. Like today, you get collateral on your mortgage of your land or your house. So what we're working on is getting that framework done. We're doing pilots. We're doing pilots not only in the US, we're doing also together. We're doing a pilot for smallholder farmers also in Kenya and Tanzania. That's Project Acorn. We're looking at other jurisdictions like Australia, looking at jurisdictions like Brazil, where we always have the forestry issue also. So you need to have that. So we're looking also in all the jurisdictions, how are we going to get that standard and legally binding documents, things that bring. So that's what we are doing regarding sequestration. And then you have and we already done some deals, okay? We are doing that because we think that the benefit has to go to the farmer. So he has incentive to do the right thing, and there is one issue that's becoming more and more clear, is that if you have a drought or something like that, you release carbon. So most probably somebody will have to be the depository of some buffer for that investment. So we are really looking at very detailed how to set up that market. And then the next one is the scope. Sorry?
Continue.
Yeah, and the next one where we're really looking at is this whole scope 3, the whole value chain. Because I do think that once you price the externalities in the value chain, the value chains that are the most efficient in the way they use the carbon and the environment are the ones that in the future are going to be winners. Because that means that the consumer is going to be positively impacted, either because you have better nutrition for the emissions you're producing, or because your value chain is more efficient. And that means that
if we could find a way of integrating this carbon market future, and it sounds to me as if market infrastructure for that is even shakier than the market infrastructure for regular food crops at the moment. If we can integrate that with the regen ag concept,
Yeah, definitely.
then we're somewhere we want to be.
That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, you create another margin per unit area potential for a farmer. And if you do that and you create that incentive, the farmers will respond to it. But what, as Barry says, what you need is a reliable system of that market operating, well-governed, well-regulated. This is a government thing. I think this is a thing that governments across countries should be talking about, because a ton of carbon in Rwanda is every bit as valuable to the planet as a ton of carbon in Oxford. So if you can translate that into revenue per unit area for farmers, they will respond to that, but you need a system to do that that's reliable. So when someone buys that, they know they've got it.
There's a question come in from the audience. Let me just read it. Do you think futures contracts could be designed to help better incentivize the use of more sustainable and regenerative ag practices? So, what would future contracts look like? And with the carbon story, a little bit of my background was in that. Technically it's challenging, but it's the longevity of that store. So, are you buying it for 10 years? Are you buying it forever? These are the sorts of questions that have come up. So what would the futures contracts look like to assure not only the drawdown, but the permanence? How could we handle, what would those contracts look like? Agnes, have you got a view on that?
Well, that's interesting, and I'm sure Barry does have a little bit more sense of how these futures contracts would work than me. But one of the things we've looked at, and we hope that can be looked at as we go forward, is how we start paying for ecosystem services that are coming from what communities that usually would benefit from agricultural services do. So if we looked at the value of the contribution that comes from specific areas of land that farmers would use versus what farmers do, it might be much more valuable to pay farmers to not use those lands, especially where systems are very marginal, and encouraging those systems to regenerate might be more profitable to the world than having those farmers continue degrading them. So we are looking at what regenerative systems, in the sense that you're actually encouraging regeneration of degraded systems, but also use of regenerative agriculture.
Right.
This can be done by ensuring that farmers get paid, but in terms of futures contracts, I mean, I don't know how that would work if it is going to be about carbon stocks, if it is not in small land holdings, if it is not around maybe moving into tree systems or tree crop systems that can encourage benefit from no tillage and use of tree cropping systems. So there might be opportunities we can explore there.
Barry, is there a simple vision in the bank?
Well, the thing is that, look, you cannot look them disassociated. That's why nature-based carbon is more complicated than the simple thing, I'm not emitting fossil fuels, okay? So you just don't turn on your car and you don't emit, right? So being a little bit simple here, the way you don't turn on your electric generating power plant, you don't emit. This is different, right? So you have to see that if you have a farm of 20,000 acres, right? You will have parts of your farm that most probably are in certain other, let's say, situation than another part of your farm, or some parts because your land is going to go develop faster. So what we're really looking at is how do you take a farm, you make a contract with the farmer that you're going to generate every year so much carbon, and we will then, how can you then pledge that contract to you, so that you can have that pledge and you can finance him in that. But that pledge needs, or that contract needs to be a legally financially binding contract. So if you default on that contract, you have a default, and not that you didn't fulfill let's say a promise, but you really financially defaulted, as you would default if you would not do a crop, right? So simple like that. So it's really, that's why we talk about carbon farming in the sense it's a professional activity. Right, and you need to professionally look at it, And that's where we are looking at. And yeah, could you throw that into the futures markets like you throw on the board of Chicago? I think they will get there, but I think at this moment we really need to understand the dynamics. And our bank, what we're really looking at, we want to finance that. We want to finance the transformation and get that financially pledgeable.
Okay, well, just in the last couple of minutes, a quick response.
Just a thought, maybe only a theoretical thought, but I think people think about carbon as if it's another crop off the farm. In other words, I'm growing carbon underneath the soil while I'm growing wheat on top of the soil. And of course, people are used to commodity markets in soft grains. They have futures, they have call options, put options, all these things. Farmers are used to risk management around that. The difficulty with carbon is in the soil, as John knows better than probably most people in the room, you will see it go up and down over time. If you have the right regen practices, it will go up over the long period, but you may have dip years. What I think about that as when banks lend to companies have years where profits are lower than the previous year. But banks lend to companies on a risk-adjusted basis. They look at the range of possibilities of outcomes, and they only finance against the certainty of an outcome. Carbon isn't going to go down by 100% in 1 year if you're doing the right things on the farm. It might go down by 20%. Profits often go down by 20%. Sometimes they go up by 20%. I think banks understand that, and the finance world understands that. So I think it's possible to do it.
We need to begin to draw this to a close. Are there any burning questions from our in-person? Yes, audience. A quick question, very quick question, please. Sorry, Agnes, I missed you. I do beg your pardon. Did you want to comment?
No, I wanted to ask a question to my colleague David.
Okay, all right. Well,
Dangerous.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll come to you in one moment. Yes,
Yeah.
Agnes, far away.
Yeah, no, I mean, David talked about regenerating food systems. I think you talked about Eastern Europe. One of the challenges we're looking at from a regenerative agriculture perspective is, yes, you can do it when you have stocks of fertilization in the soil, right? So I'm looking at a situation where you all have been applying stocks and stocks and stocks of fertilizers that actually remain in the soil for some time now. They all have been accumulating in the soil for some time now. On the other hand, here on this continent, we've basically been losing everything we have year after year, year after year, year after year. How then do we get to do regenerative agriculture based on organic matter per se, if we don't find that opportunity to actually ensure that we are putting in the right nutrients? So our model, the way we are looking at it today, we are thinking of what we would call an intensification model that recognizes regenerative agriculture, but also recognizes the need to apply a certain minimum amount of nutrients to get things going. So I just wanted to know whether you agree that actually you're building on a stock of minerals in the soil that we actually don't have.
Yeah. Look, I think it's obviously a very different situation. I think there are two things. The first thing is, in that situation, we had some terribly damaged soils in Eastern Europe when we started farming there. Yeah. But you have to start. And when you start and you start to think about soil health, you start to think about all the things you're talking about, Agnes, and about building nutrition into the soil, building better moisture retention, better drainage, all of these things to get better microbial populations, to get the soil in a healthier condition, because that is the bedrock of producing food. So you have to start. And I think this is where governments and assistance come in to get people through that transition. Yeah. It's not an overnight success, but you have to stick at it. And I would also question that there may well be nutrients in your soil, but just the way you're farming is causing them not to be available to the crops. Mm-hmm. Just the way the soils are constructed, there are many things that go on in soils that lock up nutrients and stop crops getting access. So that means a system of education and learning around an entirely different production system.
Okay, good. Thank you.
It's a great question. It's a huge topic. Yeah. I'm looking at our manager. We're going to have to go into tea time for a little bit. Please, a very, very succinct question.
Just to ask, going back to carbon, about the permanence of soil carbon and the saturation in the studies.
Barry, can you hear? Barry?
Yes, I can hear. Yes, I can hear.
He was on mute.
Yeah, so if you implement a beneficial management practice, as the panel knows better than I do, you will see a saturation in the soil carbon stocks in those soils. If you stop that beneficial management, you might expect to see a decline. How do you structure a market that requires actors to keep on that beneficial management long after the increase in stocks has ceased?
Oh, yeah, just sorry, I didn't get your name. My apologies. That's really why we are testing it right now, right? So that, and the other thing is to be very honest, also I think to David's point at the beginning, we have actually never invested in technology that keeps improving the land. Think about it. I don't know any type of weed that we ever planted that's actually not only was not to increase yield on the top, but actually to increase carbon sequestration on the bottom. So the reason is that I think that we have been talking to academia here in Wageningen in Holland to say, okay, could we actually have crops that actually consciously produce carbon in the ground? So we know that with today's technology, there is a saturation coming after 10 to 15 years. We know that, right? So you're actually right. But is there not a new technology that actually keeps increasing the quantity and improving? We don't know, but we are going to new territories. The fact is, and that's my position, I mean, land carbon sequestration, we can do that at $30 to $50 a ton in the agricultural side. The next best solution, that's DSS something, that costs 300 to 350 tons to sequester out of the air. We need to do it because otherwise we're not going to reach Paris. So there's $300 difference of opportunity of investment there that we can improve land sequestration. So I think that the moment that science is going to look at how can we actually improve that and we improve our management of the soil so that we can keep going up, then you're most probably not going to go up a ton per hectares anymore, but you're going to go up half a ton per hectare. But the fact is the way we are looking at Rabobank is, let's not talk about the limitation. Let's talk about the opportunity, because we as a global society, we as a humanity need Mother Earth to actually come with a solution. Yeah, and we can do
well, that. I think we're going to have to draw a close because we're well over time, and it's my fault. I'm sorry, but before thanking the three speakers, I think there's just one question that I would like to leave as a hanging question. It's a bit paraphrasing how Charles finished. Whose job is it? Whose responsibility is it to do this? Who's got the jurisdiction? Who has the authority to do this? And who's got the motivation? And so these are all questions that I think need answering. And it's the who. We've talked about the what, but who's going to do it? And this goes all the way back to the beginning of the conversation with the access to markets. So I think we're going to have to draw this to a close now. We're 10 minutes over, and apologies for that. But let me thank Agnes very much for joining, and Barry and David. Goodness, we could have talked all night. Probably we will over a beer later on. But for now, thank you everybody for being in the panel, and thank you everybody for being in the audience. So tea time.
So good.